Ah nice bir uyursun uyanmaz mısın? Ah nice bir uyursun uyanmaz mısın? Göçtü kervan kaldık dağlar.
Yeah, can we just open with a short dua? Would you like to make dua for us as an
No,
opening?
please, you're the host.
Okay, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا وسندنا وقرة أعيننا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم زدنا علما وارزقنا فهما ولا تنقصنا يا أكرم الأكرمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. I officially welcome everyone to our, I think this is our third or fourth interview with specialists in the art of Arabic calligraphy, and tonight we have with us Dr. Bilal Badat, and we say ahlan wa sahlan, welcome, and we thank you for your time, and please would you like to introduce yourself to us? We don't really know you, but we've seen you on the internet and we're really interested in your story. Bismillah, tafaddal.
That's such a, you put me on the spot there. I don't know, I'm not very good at telling my story. It's quite boring, really. It's not very exciting. But I think first and foremost, my entry point to the study of calligraphy was through academia. I did my undergraduate and master's degree. I was an archaeologist. So I worked as an archaeologist specializing in the Islamic world. And of course, I always had an interest in art and architecture, specifically Islamic art and architecture. And, you know, the kind of calligraphic tradition was always part of my mind, because in 2003 or 2004, Hassan Chalabi, who's this great master calligrapher, came to London with some of his students. Mm-hmm. And I was about 16 or 17 at the time. And there was an exhibition where he did some demonstrations with his students. And that was the first time I was really introduced to this traditional science. And I was completely taken away. It left a very strong impression on me, specifically the idea of tradition, you know, being able to connect to an isnad, or the idea of art being about more than one individual, right? These individuals were connected to Hassan Hoja, who kind of assimilated himself into this really beautiful genealogy of calligraphers going all the way back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad. So that was the first time that I really saw, you know, something called traditional calligraphy. And of course, growing up in London, it's not easy as a 17-year-old to just go to Turkey and to study, but it's always something that I wanted to do, I can say. And then when I wanted to do a PhD, I thought it was a great excuse for me to move to Turkey if I do my PhD about something to do with calligraphy. That will give me a chance to go to Turkey and do some research. And then I was very fortunate, I was very blessed to meet Efdaluddin Kılıç, who's my calligraphy teacher. I was working in Cambridge at the time, and at the Cambridge Muslim College, and Efdaluddin Hoja came to Cambridge to give a workshop on calligraphy for the students. And so Nabila Winter, who was working at the college, she said, why don't you, she knew that I was interested in this kind of stuff. So she said, why don't you meet him? And we went for a lovely walk around Cambridge for about an hour or two. And then for me, it became very clear that this is something I would love to do, or something I would love to dedicate my life to. And so I moved for my PhD research. I studied Ottoman calligraphy, specifically looking at methods of transmission, how this particular craft was passed down from master to student in the Ottoman period. And then as part of my research, I was able to move there, and I lived there for about 4 years. And then I began my apprenticeship with Efdaluddin Hoja. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like when I retell the story, it sounds like it was, I've read too many comic books. When you read the comic books, you make yourself at the center of your own story, and you say, well, I did this, and I was inspired by this, and then this happened to me, and I did X, Y, Z. The truth is that, I was very fortunate that God put certain people in my life at a particular time, and they kind of pulled me. I mean, even when I say it like that, it makes myself sound special. But I was very fortunate, I can say, to be able to meet, these great individuals, and I think they really kind of helped me to study calligraphy. And after studying with Efdaluddin Hoja for about 4 or 5 years, in 2017 in Ramadan, I took my ijaza from him, and since then I have been living in Germany, and I have a number of apprentices of my own. So that's my comic book story in a nutshell.
MashaAllah. For us in a Muslim sense, I mean, we obviously are inspired by that. I mean, for you, it might sound like a boring story, but for us, it's definitely, it's exciting to hear these things, because you don't meet people like yourself every day. You meet students of, they went to study in Egypt, they did their fiqh, and they did their masters of Islamic law and this and that. But you never meet somebody. It's not every day that you can meet somebody who who's a master of Arabic calligraphy, and who's actually got an academic background in that as well. So for you kind of married the tradition with the academic studies. And I mean, you did, I read in your bio that you spent 5 years studying with Sheikh Efdaluddin in the Ottoman school. Is that correct? 5 years?
I started with him in February 2017. I mean, I still study with Efdaluddin Hoja. He's still my teacher, and there's a tremendous benefit from, even just watching him, or I still continue to show him all of my latest works before I produce anything. I always would like to show him and get his corrections. I think for most calligraphers you speak to, you will get a similar answer, that relationship between the student and the teacher never really stops. One never really sees oneself as a master in a sense. One is always a student of a particular teacher.
Yes, no, definitely. I mean, that alaqa, or that connection between the student and teacher, I think that is something that is ever present in all the Islamic sciences. You study at the Islamic university, but you're still encouraged to go to the mosque and go sit at the feet of a sheikh, who's reading this kitab and giving the the lessons over to you. So that's also like yourself. This also interests me. The concept of isnad, the concept of having that connection. It's not only connection to your teacher, but that there is a chain of transmission that goes right up to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is a question that I wanted to ask you. Okay, that you are an archaeologist as well, so this, the history. So maybe we can pick your brains a little bit, because sometimes there's a lot of unanswered questions. So in terms of the we have with you obviously received an ijaza in the Ottoman style. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
correct. Yes. Sorry.
So in receiving an ijaza, your ijaza is obviously a permission or certification certifying you as a calligrapher in the traditional art of calligraphy, but also connecting you to that chain of masters. So on your ijaza, do you have like what do we call it now? Do they write out your sanad as well? Or is it just, do you just get the ijaza in terms of the permission or certification?
Before I answer that, just to correct you, because I know I said that the isnad goes to the time of the Prophet Muhammad, but it doesn't go to the Prophet Muhammad himself, because he is not considered to be a calligrapher. However, it's the time of the Prophet Muhammad, because a lot of the isnads go to Ali ibn Abi Talib, right? That's the kind of considered to be the patron saint or the kind of founder of Islamic calligraphy, the first calligrapher of the Islamic period. But in Mustafa Ali is this great scholar and bureaucrat of the 16th century Ottoman Empire. He wrote a book called Menakibi Hunerveran, which is the epic deeds of the artists. And in that book, he gives like an isnad of calligraphy. And he says that there were, I think, approximately 40 or so scribes that were alive during the time of the Prophet Muhammad. So it's not necessarily that the Prophet Muhammad is considered to be a calligrapher, but because of his spiritual presence and the fact that he received revelation, and then that this revelation was then transcribed by the scribes in his context, the silsila is nevertheless connected to him in that particular way. But he's not considered to be a calligrapher who passed down the knowledge of how to write letters beautifully. That privilege is given to Ali ibn Abi Talib. But in other silsilas, like there's a silsila Hattatin or silsila of calligraphers in Mustafa Hilmi Haqqaqzade's 19th century Mizanul Hat, which is a treatise which literally means the measurement of calligraphy, but it includes a sanad where it goes through Ali ibn Abi Talib, and then it goes back to a number of pre-Islamic prophets who were considered to be calligraphers, right? So some of these silsilas that are developed in the Ottoman period, some of them go to the Prophet Idris, for example. Others go all the way back to Adam alayhi salam as the first calligrapher. Some of them go to angels who are transcribing the deeds of men. They're considered to be calligraphers because they are scribes. So this kind of isnad tradition is really important. To answer your question about the on ijazas nowadays, no, you don't have a full sanad. They just write the name of your teacher. The teacher himself will write it actually, that I am the teacher of this particular person who is graduating. However, one interesting thing is that in the Ottoman period, you have these elaborate ijaza ceremonies, which we still have to this day. And during those ceremonies, we have some records of what took place. And aside from the typical things like distribution of baklava and recitation of Quran and all these kinds of things, the sanad would be read out. It would be read out loud. So the students got a very clear idea that they are, again, assimilating into a genealogy of masters, and therefore they have a responsibility to protect and preserve this knowledge which has been passed down by these particular individuals. There's a responsibility there. Just because you have the ijazah now, it doesn't mean you can go off into the world and do your own thing. You know, there is some form of connection here, a spiritual connection, we can say, as well as a connection to the technical knowledge that has been passed down through these individuals. And this is why there's so much value in looking at the writings that are produced by people in the sanad, right? Whether it's your sanad or a general calligraphic sanad, it's a really, a powerful thing, a really important thing. It's good to kind of pray for, one of the practices that people used to do in the Ottoman period was to go to visit the great Mehmed Shevki Effendi, who I'm sure everyone has heard of, this great 19th century master. Every Friday he would go to the grave of his teacher, and then he would go to the grave of his teacher's teacher, right? And do a Fatiha for these individuals. In some of the other mushafs that we see from the Ottoman period, in the colophon, in the signature, they would say, katabahu Ismail Effendi, and min tilmid, so and so, min tilmid, so and so, min tilmid, so and so, whatever, etc., etc. So sometimes they would write down their own silsila in the signature itself. Now, why is this important? Because it helps us to understand how individuals in the Ottoman Empire saw themselves and saw the work that they produced. Did they see this as a product of my own genius, right? I did this, right? This is a product of me. This is from my own training, my own, work. Or did they see it as a product of a genealogy, right? They saw it as, well, I am this, who am I? I am the student of my teacher. That's who I am. I took this knowledge from this particular person. who took it from this particular person, who took it from this particular person. So that's of course we have many signatures where it's just the name of the individual, and that of course doesn't mean that this person is still not humble and doesn't see themselves as a student, but the manuscripts allow more space, let's say, for people to speak in this particular way. So that's a really interesting thing I find about the Isnad tradition and what it says about what it means to be a calligrapher, what artistry means in the Ottoman period.
MashaAllah, shukran for that. Really enlightening. On that, I just wanted to say, I read some on some Arabic site, and this was only this one reference that I had to this, where they were saying that the first written ijaza was in the year 700 and something, 760 something Hijri. So your comment on that, like when did the actual written ijaza start? Where did it start?
Are you talking about an ijaza in general for anything, or are you talking about an ijaza for calligraphy?
We're talking about the calligraphic one, the calligraphy one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. As far as I know, and I'm very happy to be corrected here, but it's attributed to I think his name is Abdul Rahman ibn Sayyid.
Exactly. Yes.
I don't know the first name, but his name is Ibn Sayyid, who was a 14th century calligrapher, I believe. And
okay.
Or at least the tradition is attributed to him, and that's pre-Ottoman, I believe. And again, I may be mistaken, but it's from the Mamluk period. But there's no physical documentation of that ijaza for calligraphy. This is actually a reference from a later Ottoman writer saying this is where the tradition began. But as far as we know, in terms of like a physical ijaza that you can hold in your hand, this would be from the Ottoman period. But I can't say for certain whether that's the case. Ur Derman, who's a much better writer and scholar than I am, has written an article about the ijaza tradition, which you can find on the internet, and I think the information would be contained in there. There's also a great it's called the Diyanet Encyclopedia, and there's an entry on the ijaza and calligraphy. I think the information is contained in there.
Okay. There was one thing that I just lost, something I wanted to ask you now on what you were saying. But connected to calligraphy, there's always this theme of it's a spiritual practice. It's this Islamic spiritual thing that when you write, then you feel like you're walking on the clouds, kind of thing. And then when you actually start learning calligraphy, you get frustrated with yourself a lot because you get a lot of things wrong and your pen breaks and all this, and then sometimes you actually forget about the whole spiritual feeling. But on that, I wanted to ask you, have you ever come across, I know there were references made to a particular movement in, I don't know if it was a movement in calligraphy or it was a general Sufi movement or an offshoot of a Sufi movement, which they call themselves the Hurufiyat. Do you have any knowledge about this group of people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, it certainly exists in the early Ottoman period, this kind of Hurufiyya, which is related to the, let's say, the symbolic and spiritual power of particular letters, right? But the Hurufiyya had an awkward relationship with orthodoxy because of some of they were considered to be heterodox at times because some of the practices that they followed. But the idea of letters having some kind of spirituality, which is the Hurufiyya, of course, that's where the name comes from, is not something that is limited to the Hurufiyya order. The idea that letters can manifest some kind of spiritual symbolism is an important one, not only in the Ottoman tradition, but in general, right? Abjad, for example, this idea that letters have numerical values, right? Even the word abjad itself, it's abjad. I'm sure you know what abjad is, but just to give a very brief summary, that each letter is considered to have a numerical value. So Alif is 1, Ba is 2, Jim is 3, Dal is 4. And that's where the abjad comes from, right? Alif, Ba, Jim, Dal, Ha, Wow, abjad, Hawaz, Hotti, etc., etc. So the letter, the name of God, for example, is Alif, Lam, Lam, Ha, right? Alif is 1. The numerical value is Lam is 30. Another Lam is 30, and the Ha is 5. So together that makes 66. That's the numerical value of Allah. So one of the things of the, and abjad is an incredible science, right? It's a really deep and rich and enriching science. So one of the beliefs that people that follow abjad suggest is that if certain words have the same numerical value as blessed words, then there's considered to be some kind of spiritual, symbolic, or spiritual relevance to these words. So I'll give you an example. We just spoke about Allah, which is 66, right? So Hilal, the crescent, right, is also 66 because it's Ha, Lam, Alif, Lam, right? The same letters as Allah. Laleh, which is a tulip in Persian, is the same, right? It's Lam 30, Alif 1, Lam 30, Ha 5. So that's 66. So these kinds of symbols, like, you know, the crescent, of course, has such a powerful importance in the Islamic tradition. The same as the tulip, if you go to Turkey or the Persianate world, these things have a kind of symbolic reference. And sometimes people say it's because it shares a numerical value, the same numerical value as Allah. I come from a South Asian background, and we always used to write 786 on everything. We used to see it everywhere. I'm sure
in Cape Town,
South Africa is the
well.
same, right? There's a strong Gujarati community there. 786 is everything. But 786 is the abjad numerical value of Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. If you do all the letters and you add the numerical values together, it becomes 786. So even we do it without knowing where it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
We have this kind of, you know, interesting belief in the numerical value of letters. It's a very powerful idea. One of the books that is produced in the 18th century is called Tuhfe Hattatin, which is by someone called Suleyman Sadreddin Mustaqimzadeh, who's a great writer on Ottoman calligraphy. And he again speaks about calligraphy in this way. He says that al-khattat is the same numerical value as, I think it's the shahada. He puts these things together. He says katib is the same number as this thing. Al-khattat is the same number as this thing. Therefore, calligraphy is considered to be like a sacred science. So we see the emergence of these interesting parallels between letters and spirituality all throughout the Islamic period.
And I mean, there's no such thing as coincidence in Islam, especially if we look at the Quran, which is the Mus'haf is a book full of words, letters, and I'm sure Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in his infinite wisdom, you know, he puts those things in place for us to reflect. So I think people with deep reflection, they would come across these things because they are reflecting more on the ayat, or they're reflecting deeper on the letters or the letter forms and so on. I think it can't be something that can just be flat out disputed. So there is, like you say, some truth to it, because and you were saying about 786. I wanted to tell you that in Cape Town we have a radio station, Islamic radio station called Radio 786. So so it's like we see it in the books. We see, like, you know, there's a you know, people's bumper stickers. You'll see 786, or they change their phone numbers to 786, their number plates of the cars. So it runs through the Muslim community, with, like you say, without us really understanding maybe the origin thereof. But I was also interested in finding out a little bit more about your practice and how did you experience that? Were you studying calligraphy purely on its own, and you dedicated your full time to that while you were in Turkey? You were there for 3 years, am I right?
Yeah, a little bit longer than 3 years, about 4 years in total.
Or were you like doing other studies alongside doing that calligraphy studies with your ustad?
I'd say for about a year I was doing, from the time that I started, it was a year of prolonged study. many hours a day, trying to see the teacher as much as I could, which then was about twice a week, trying to really work because I couldn't be like a full-time calligrapher and all that, because I was writing my PhD at the same time.
Yes, yes.
And also I had to go back to London sometimes to go to work, to do some teaching at university, and then I had to come back to Turkey. So unfortunately I couldn't really, dedicate myself to the craft as much as I wanted to. But nevertheless, I'd say it was in a series of bursts. So 3 months of hardcore writing, and then 3 months back in England, and then 3 months back of hardcore writing. But the first year was definitely just, I think all students of calligraphy will probably describe a similar experience, which is when you first enter into the study of calligraphy, if you enjoy it and if it resonates with you, and if you're willing to push through the pain and the kind of self-doubt and the self-hate and the self-criticism, if you're willing to push through that and being criticized by others, of course, which is an important part of the tradition, then you kind of go into an obsession where you can write.
You were criticized. Who criticized you? What could they say?
No, what I mean by criticism is your teacher, right? Your
Oh,
teacher
yes,
will
of
always.
course. Of course. Okay, I think we just lost Dr. Bilal there for a second. Dr. Bilal, can you hear me? Are you with us? Okay, while we are waiting for Dr. Bilal to reconnect, I'm going to share the video just so we can get a glimpse into Dr. Bilal's Ustad, Ustad Efdaluddin Kılıç. I hope I'm saying it correctly. So I'll just do that and we'll wait for Dr. Bilal to reconnect, inshallah.
In sync with the artist's breath and thoughts, the pen must move smoothly at a precise angle with right amount of pressure to continue writing the words of God. Fatih Özkaf practices Islamic art of decorative handwriting, similar to calligraphy, but with a deeper philological meaning. A tradition revered and considered sacred by Muslims for centuries, calligraphy is the Islamic way of artistic expression. What is calligraphy?
Calligraphy is a type of script invented after the revelation of the Quran in the Arabic language to make the words look more beautiful. Before that, the Arabic script wasn't considered artistic, but after the Quran was revealed, Muslims made it their mission to write it in a beautiful way.
So what are you going to draw today?
I write in the name of Allah, the merciful, the magnificent.
Okay, this was
First verse of the.
okay.
Right?
From one of the caves overlooking Mecca, Prophet Muhammad received his first revelation of the Quran, and it continued in pieces for the next 23 years.
In the beginning, there were the Arabs, which were having the Prophet within their community and started converting. But by the time the verses of Quran was coming in pieces, in longer short pieces, most of them were memorizing it because their culture was on memorization. They didn't leave any written material about their culture. Very, very limited, very least.
After the passing of Prophet Muhammad in the early 7th century, Muslims compiled and transcribed the Holy Book, marking a shift from an oral to a written religious tradition. Muslims were faced with another challenge, They could not use figurative arts to illustrate the essence of their preaching.
When the Quran came, in Arabic society were all idol worshippers. So this is the advice for the Muslim community, not to have the risk of going back to the earlier faith or beliefs.
Traditionally, calligraphy is used for writing verses from the Muslim holy book, the Quran. And its significance stems from the essence of the religion that forbids depicting God in any human form or living creature.
And they didn't want the Prophet himself as imaginary valuable item. So they avoided strictly not to draw any images of him.
As a result, the script itself became a work of art. It is in the words of God, his verbal attributes, written down beautifully that Muslims feel his presence.
The time of Caliph Ottoman, they invest on paper and whatever the material needed for book making. So they made 7 copies of the first text. So this is the first attempt in terms of providing people some calligraphic samples.
Okay. So is this a particular style in calligraphy?
And this is what we call sulus.
Sulus. Okay.
One of the 6 very traditional calligraphy styles, which are called as either shesh kalem or aklama sitte, which means 6 different styles.
Okay.
So this is one of them.
Tell me something about the lines you've drawn here. How does this work in terms of symmetry, the thickness, the distance?
So if we are talking about this particular style and particular composition, all over the world, if you show this line, most of the people, if they are within that Islamic tradition and culture, they could recognize this, even though they don't remember or they don't recognize the letters one by one. They could just say, this possibly be Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
Okay.
And this is the great success of the calligraphers in terms of creating.
Sorry, so I was wondering if you could show me the best way to develop that composition.
Okay. Do you have any try?
Yeah, I thought to do it in this way. So,
To become a calligrapher, like all the other scientific things, you have to sit down with the master. First, you learn these tools, and also you learn how to respect, how you show your respect.
what do you think the best way to write it would be?
الرفيق قبل الطريق.
I came to Istanbul to study with Efdaluddin Kılıç, who is a master of this Ottoman style of calligraphy, and I tried to learn as much as I could from this man. And essentially, it was about how this knowledge of calligraphy was transmitted from master to student in the Ottoman Empire.
And we can leave this space empty.
Yeah. Okay.
Even though calligraphy existed in the early period of Ottoman Empire, we can say that it starts with Sheikh Hamdullah, the calligraphy teacher of Sultan.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa
Sorry.
alaikum salam. Yeah,
Some internet issues, unfortunately.
no problem.
Inshallah it'll work. If it goes again, then please just be patient with me.
No, it's okay. It's fine. Absolutely fine. I think everybody's still here. They're enjoying the company. Yeah, so welcome back. I was just playing that short clip, which people can find on YouTube. You can just search for it. It's done by TRT World, and you can watch the full documentary there, inshallah. But I just wanted to show that small part where you're actually sitting with your teacher and you're going through some steps. So you first wrote in like a ballpoint pen, and this is your composition that you intended to do, and then you show your teacher, and then he was like, okay, this is how you can improve, and so on. So do you still do that up to this day? Do you still show your teacher your intended compositions?
I think sometimes when you're making a composition, you might sketch it in pencil first before you try to do it in a kalem, just to see if there's a better way of writing it. You might say, okay, move this letter here, move it, which is most often the case. And then you can begin to practice doing a particular composition. But if you're writing like a small line of thuluth or a small line of nas, then of course you just use the pen straight away, and then you begin writing. And then of course the teacher will administer. I can show you, for example, here we have like a piece that I was working on, and we can see the teacher's corrections are here. So sometimes the corrections are to do with a better way to write the particular letters, or sometimes it will be because I've made like a spelling mistake and he's pointing that out here. And this is the typical way. I mean, now that we're on Zoom, it's kind of difficult, right? We have to kind of shift the way that we're teaching. I have my own students and they send me their work, and you have to kind of correct it on top of their thing, or you have to do your, I can show you, this is like trying to show a student how to do the correct way to write it, and you kind of have to do some kind of visual annotations, right? You have to say, this is wrong, this is correct, etc., etc. That's the way that, and you have to, because normally you can just say it orally, right? You can say, do this, but now you have to really have some kind of visual annotation. But yeah, typically that's the way that you would do it, is you should go to see your teacher for everything, not just for calligraphy, but for everything. I think it's really important.
So tell us about your students. You in Germany now, and do you find that there's is there a community of calligraphers there? Or Ustad Rafiq, actually, to be honest with you, Ustad Rafiq, the Turkish teacher I was referring to earlier on, he originally grew up in Germany. So he's Turkish, but he grew up in Germany, both Turkey and Germany, because so he's still got family in Turkey and Germany. So is there a large, because there's a Turkish community there, do you find that there's also some hojas there teaching calligraphy, or are you the hoja that everybody's coming to now?
I wouldn't say everybody, but there's like a very, very small community of like calligraphers here. I think there are some other calligraphers in Germany. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting them yet, but as far as I understand from the internet, there are a number of other calligraphers here. But I have my own apprentices here. There's about 6 or 7 of them. I also teach calligraphy at the university. So every semester we have about 30 to 40 students that are studying calligraphy every week in the Kalam, in the Faculty of Islamic Theology, which is where I work. But they're studying, they come to the class, they do their meshq, and then they go home. They don't really continue beyond the semester. Let's say most of them, 99% of them, don't really continue beyond the semester. But I have a small group of students. Some of them are German, some are Muslim, most of them are Muslim, some non-Muslim, some from Syria, some are Syrian refugees, some were students at the university, some are of Turkish extraction, Turkish background, sorry. And then before quarantine, we would try to meet up as much as we could. And that's something I really miss, actually, is the environment of being around the students. And because being around the students is also like to quote Mustaqimzadeh, again, this author I was talking about earlier, he kind of reminds teachers that your blessing comes from the students, right? And you have a responsibility to pass on this knowledge to someone else. And so when that's kind of cut off, you're only like a half master, right? You're only doing the work, but you're not able to pass it on in the same way that you should. And I think with the quarantine, it's really, it's for everyone, it's new, right? It's a really new thing. It's a very difficult thing. For me, it's extremely difficult because I'm like a caveman when it comes to technology. As you can see, right, my internet has already cut off once during this conversation. So when students send me emails or thing, and for me to scan it, print it on something, send it back, it's like really tough. And then sometimes it just goes into the ether, and then I don't. But when they come to see me, I love it, because then I can sit with them. We can have tea, we can go to eat, we can talk, etc., etc. That's something that I really miss, I think. But some people are fantastic at it. Like my teacher, Efdaluddin Hoca, is using Zoom to do classes every week, where he puts like a camera so everyone can see the writing that he's doing, but I had a conversation with him. We spoke on the phone last week about how his own experiences, and he says, of course, it's led to some, you know, new openings and exciting things, accessibility. People from all around the world can study now with the Hoja in Istanbul. At the same time, you miss the experience of being around the students, because learning calligraphy is about so much more than the transmission of a particular style of writing. You know, the teacher, and this is something you only understand, I guess, when you become a teacher, and this is something I learned from Efdaluddin Hoca, is the way that the teacher can help a student without overtly showing him that he's helping, right? And that kind of, you know, that's something that Efdaluddin Hoca, it's something that he does, and it's something that you can only learn after perhaps speaking to him, or perhaps becoming a teacher yourself, which is knowing how to, you know, control the pace of the student's learning in a way that matches his or her personality, in a way that is commensurate to that own student's. The goal of the teacher is basically to actualize the potential of the student. That's the main goal of the teacher, right? Is what is the potential of this student, and how can I actualize it? And sometimes, as Efdaluddin Hoca said, sometimes you have to slow them down, right? They might be a great student, but they're going so fast, and you have to slow them down. And the student doesn't really understand that, because the student in the presence of a teacher, a student is like a child. You know, the child doesn't understand tarbiyah until he's older. And you know, the wisdom of these great teachers and masters of the past is they know how to do this through craft, right? Through perhaps making them write particular verses of the Quran, making them write particular hadiths, making them repeat a lesson a certain number of times. It's a way of breaking the student, right? And then putting them back together again. And that kind of stuff you can't do over Zoom. You know, it's really tough when you haven't been in the presence of the student and understood their personality and their adab and the things that they want to do, you know. But of course, it's not all doom and gloom. It has its blessings too, I think.
Shukran. I just want to go through the questions because there are two questions that I didn't get to address. So somebody says, Sultana says, during the Ottoman time, at what age were students introduced to the Islamic art sciences like calligraphy, and was it part of the madrasa system? And then Shazir says, Assalamu alaikum, what is the significance of writing the Quran nowadays where it can be printed from previously written manuscripts?
To answer the first question, students would start learning calligraphy at a very, very young age. The kind of Ottoman primary schools of this, or the Subyan Mektebs, for the schools for children, a lot of them would be introduced to calligraphy, not in the way that we're studying, you know, as an apprenticeship, but in terms of like good handwriting, knowing how to compose the Arabic letters. And then those students that were particularly gifted, or those that would go on to secondary learning, would go to madrasas. And in the madrasas, when we look at the curriculums of the Ottoman madrasas, we can see calligraphy is a fundamental part of the curriculum, right? Which is why if we go to Turkey nowadays, we can see that the teaching of calligraphy has returned to the Kalam faculty, right? And this is not something new. This is something which is very much part of a classical Islamic education, which is good handwriting. And those students that were particularly gifted, or those ones that really enjoyed their studies during the study of calligraphy, would then, after their madrasa studies had finished, could then go on and continue with a particular master. So when you look at the biographies of calligraphers, a lot of the time we can see that first they went to madrasa and then they chose a particular master, or they continued with their madrasa teacher. Calligraphy is not just limited to the madrasas, but it's also part of the cultivation of a cultured individual in the palace environment. So we can see in the Imperial College in the Topkapı Palace, or the Galatasaray, the new, or some of the various palaces in the Ottoman Empire, that we had these calligraphy teachers that were hired to teach calligraphy to, you know, the young janissaries or to people of the court. It was considered to be part of a general refinement of character and education in the Ottoman period. The second question, what is the value of writing the Quran?
What's the significance of writing the Quran nowadays, where it can be printed from previously written manuscripts?
Don't know. Don't know. I mean, I guess it's of course it's great if you can write a Quran, but not everyone can write a Quran from start to finish. It's extremely difficult. I mean, if you're wondering about which one has more spiritual value, I mean, of course they're both the same. The Quran is the Quran, whether it's printed or whether it's handwritten. Perhaps in terms of beauty, perhaps in terms of aesthetic experience, we can say that there may be some qualitative difference between holding a mushaf written by a master calligrapher and holding a mushaf which is printed in the, in like a factory. Perhaps there is a qualitative difference in terms of the aesthetic experience it gives us as viewers. But in terms of ontological spiritual value, of course, the Quran is the Quran, regardless of its format. I think we can say that in general, the art of calligraphy emerged to glorify the words of God, right? The words of God are pure.
Could I perhaps maybe just comment on that to Brother Shazir? I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Please.
Is that what I've also noticed is that in the Muslim world, like wherever there are Quran, mushafs being printed at a large scale, like for example in Saudi Arabia, they do have in-house calligraphers, like Sheikh Uthman Taha, who actually by hand wrote the Quranic script, and then that was then scaled down to the size of the print. So actually there is, I would say that there is still a need for people to understand or the topic of writing Quran in the calligraphic form, because obviously it's that's the origin of it. It came from the handwriting, not from a computer or from a machine. I mean, there's only like copies that can be made after that is done. I know there are some, in some instances, there are, fonts that can be used, but yeah, that's, I haven't really seen any Qur'ans that are printed specifically from computer fonts. All the Qur'ans in my home that I have that's been printed are all originally handwritten, that has just been reprinted or copied. So maybe that would help Brother Shazir understand. And then there's another question from Widad. How does studying Islamic calligraphy work in a Western-based or Eurocentric university? It is a subject, or I think it may be saying, is it a subject or course in a degree program or an extramural activity in a society-based club?
It's a module which is taken by the students that contributes to their overall credits. Yeah, I mean, calligraphy is, for the students that study calligraphy, at least in the Kalam faculty, they're not just Muslim students. We get students from the Oriental Studies faculty who want to, because it helps them with philology, it helps them to learn to read old manuscripts by studying it themselves. Some students are interested in it as part of their history. Some want to undergo the experience in order to understand manuscripts better. I think that's a huge value of studying calligraphy in the first place, is that it really helps one to understand how objects are made in the past. That's one of the things that in archaeology, it's called experimental archaeology. In terms of research, we can say it's practice as research. And for other students, again, at the end of the day, we're in the Kalam faculty, and it really is a recreation of the way that theology was taught in the past, right? There are certain openings or certain things that can be achieved through studying this particular craft, which we can really benefit from. So aside from this is what we do in our university time. And then I also teach separately outside of the university to anyone who's not in the university or in the university, and they can come to me, and they come from all the different parts this region. And sometimes I go to other parts of Germany to give courses on calligraphy.
So it's like it seems like most of your time or is being taken up by what you know and your skill in calligraphy. Do you still like have time for other hobbies and things, or is this now your primary go-to hobby? I wouldn't say it's a hobby.
I wish it was my primary hobby or the primary thing that I dedicated my time to. Unfortunately, I think university commitments have taken over at the moment, which is quite sad. So I'm very happy if I can even do like an hour of writing a day. In terms of my hobbies, I mean, I used to love playing football all the time. Sports, I love watching anything to do with sports, watching sports, playing sports, all these kinds of things. But now that I'm getting a little bit older, the body can't follow what the mind wants to do or the heart wants to do, unfortunately. So you go from being an active participant to an active spectator. But sadly being but sadly being a spectator involves, well, for me anyway, it involves junk food. So that then takes its toll on the body and prevents you from playing sports even further. I'd say those are my two hobbies at the moment: eating and watching eating and watching sports. Sorry, it's not the answer that you were looking for, unfortunately. But I mean, I think for me, it's the key thing is I'm working on some pieces. One of the things I'm working on at the moment is taqleed. You know, of course, in theology and in fiqh and even in politics, taqleed has a relevance. I mean, it comes from the Arabic verb qallada, meaning to, literally, it means to imitate or obey or to follow someone. And people use this, of course. If anyone is following a madhab, then of course many a times we're doing taqleed, right? But in calligraphy, it means to imitate the work of a great master of the past, and then to put in the. I can show you. Can I show you an example of?
Sure. I think everybody's waiting for the examples.
Okay, sorry, I'm not very good.
Even if you have a slideshow, do you have a slideshow or something that you can show?
No, I don't. But anyway, this is a new piece that you can see. It says, I don't know if in Zoom it's the right way around, but it says Ali and Fatima. Right?
Yes.
This is an old piece. It's an imitation of a very old, not very old, about 150 years old, by someone called Mehmed Shafiq Bey. And he did this composition, and his master Izzet Effendi, Qazi Asker Mustafa Izzet Effendi, also did a version of this. But we could see this is the colophon over here, and I'll just read it out in Arabic. It says, "Naqalahu Bilal min talamid Efdaluddin an khat Mehmed Shafiq ghafara lahum." So you're meant to indicate in the signature that it's an imitation of another master's work. This is another one I'm working on. You can see here. So the signature will go here.
Can I guess?
It says Allahu wahdahu. Oh, sorry. Can you guess who it is?
Alhamdulillah.
No, it's a good guess. It's a very good guess. But it's a later calligrapher called Abdullah Iffet Effendi. He's a 19th century calligrapher. Not very that well known compared to the other masters, but he's also a very great calligrapher. This is a piece by Ismail Hakkı Effendi. Again, the signature will go here. It says, yeah, Hafiz. And again, this is a taqleed. So the ijaza is also a taqleed, right? It's an imitation. And the benefit of this for people like me who are not, who's not someone that is, let's say, naturally gifted in the, you have these prodigies in calligraphy where they're from the age of 18 or 16 and they're producing masterpieces. For people like me, you really have to learn by imitation. You have to look at the work of masters of the past and see how they were doing things. And that's what imitation gives you, because you're staring at a piece for their work for like hours and hours and figuring out how they wrote Allah, how they did their wow, all the minute intricacies, and then you're trying to repeat those intricacies by yourself using your own hand. And through that way, you're absorbing all of the deeper aesthetic values in that particular work, and you're taking them on board. That's the value of taqleed for a calligrapher. And calligraphers do taqleed all throughout their career because it really helps one to become a better calligrapher, right? So Hafiz Usman did taqleed of Sheikh Hamdullah, right? We can see that in the signatures. Mahmud Jalaluddin did taqleed of Hafiz Usman and Sheikh Hamdullah. Mehmed Shevki Effendi did taqleed of Hafiz Usman and Sheikh Hamdullah. Qazi Asker Mustafa Izzat Effendi did taqleed of Sheikh Hamdullah. That's the way to progress. That's the way to learn. You know, so these are some. Unfortunately, I spilt some Diet Coke on this one here, so I need to. Speaking, yeah, I know. Speaking of junk food, I know. Unfortunately, I don't remember the context, but I dropped some Diet Coke on it.
You should definitely put that one up for sale, because I mean it's got
Diet Coke on.
It's got your essence, in some of your spiritual essence.
My essence is Diet Coke. It's the blood that runs through my veins. It gives me energy. Yes.
I'm only joking. Then we have, before I actually go to the last question, I wanted to ask you earlier on already when we were talking about history. There's this story of what's his name, the father of the proportionate scripts, Ibn Muqla, and then he was imprisoned and for some reason got into trouble with the authorities, and then his hand was cut off, his right hand, his writing hand, and then he started writing with his left hand. Is that correct? And then they chopped his left hand off, and then what happened then? Do you perhaps know exactly what? Is there any reference in history about what happened to him?
Those kinds of stories, only God knows the truth about what happened. But in some of the narrations that you come across, which is that after both of his hands were cut off, he attached a reed pen to his mutilated arm, and then he continued to write by strapping the reed pen to his arm, and then he was able to continue writing. And to be honest with you, even though it sounds fantastic and it sounds like it may be untrue, there's an Ottoman calligrapher who didn't have any hands, and he wrote, I believe, by putting a qalam on his foot. And we actually have some examples of his writing. They survived to this day. I think his name is Bidest Effendi. Bidest or Budapest or Bidest Effendi. Bidest literally means without a hand, right? And the story is that he once he saw a master calligrapher writing, and then he really wanted to do it, and so he decided to become a calligrapher. And it just goes to show how, through dedication you can really, you think about an individual who doesn't have any hands, and they still, and to be honest with you, the work that he produced is perhaps better than many able calligraphers that have both of their hands. Another classic example, of course, is Yasari Effendi, who I think Shahriyan Shah just spoke about.
Yes.
Who was rejected because of his physical condition. And he is, of course, one of the greatest ever masters of calligraphy. I mean, he was so crippled that he was carried around he had to be carried around in like a basket. That was his physical condition. But,
SubhanAllah, just shows like the persistence of these people, people of the past. They didn't have access to the tools that we have, but they put in so much effort.
Well, this is one of the lessons, I think, for students that are going through this kind of Zoom. I think the problems that we face now because of Zoom and lack of mobility and stuff is, there's always a way. You can't let these things be a barrier for you. And this really shows the true dedication and true perseverance, of students. And it's not easy. I mean, even when I was studying, and it's not easy for people that it wasn't just me that came from another country to study in Turkey. There's so many. Muhammad Hobe, for example. I mean, these people like Muhammad Hobe Hoja, it's not easy to do what he did, right? This is there's a really great lesson and a really great example in this, to leave your family, to go to a new country, a completely new country, to you know, lose the warmth and comfort of your home, a new language, new experience. And to, you know, he's just, you know, of course, one example, but, you know, people that are studying now, that you should have no sense of entitlement. You know, the universe doesn't owe you any favors. You know, you really have to go out there and you have to study, and calligraphy will push you in this particular way. I think before my internet cut off, I was saying that once you get through that initial obstacle, then this kind of cosmos opens up to you, where you go into the obsession and you can lose yourself and you can write and write and write. And that's a really rewarding part, but you really have to push through this initial phase, I think. And of course, I'm not saying it gets easier. In fact, it probably gets harder, and probably you go through even more frustrations once you come out on the other side. But I guess you just really have to push yourself and trust yourself, and you know, really examine yourself, and how much do you really want this particular thing, and what value do you give to calligraphy.
Okay, so let me just get through these questions before I forget. So this person says, Surur Ali says, Salam everyone, as you progress, do you find yourself having a deeper connection with certain letters or phrases? And Zulfa Samodin says, Dr. Bilal, at what stages of learning calligraphy should one study pedagogy or Islamic theology related sciences? What is the best way to study Islamic theology?
Okay, the first one, it's like a great question. I think that, yeah, certainly there are some letters that stand out to you as having a particular beauty, or some Quranic phrases perhaps, or some hadiths that you may continue to write over and over and over again. Rabbi Yasirri wala tu'assir being one of them that we can see people are frequently writing over and over again. For the second one, I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm not a theologian. I'm not one of the mutakallimun, so I don't really know how to study Islamic theology. You'd probably have to go to someone who's a little bit more knowledgeable and aware than I am to answer that question. I even though I'm at the Faculty of Islamic Theology, I have a very particular role there, which is to do with arts and culture and that historical aspects of the Islamic tradition. But I wouldn't dare to give advice to anyone on how one should begin to study Islamic theology. It says, at what stages of learning calligraphy should one study Islamic theology? I'm not sure. But in terms of learning calligraphy, just try to do it. The earlier you can study, the better. I mean, a child is probably too young, but once they are able to have good hand-eye coordination, and in the Ottoman period, I guess it would be around 10 to 12 years old, they would start to study calligraphy. So by the time they're 18, they already have a ijaza. You know, people like Mustafa Rakim Effendi and Shevki Effendi and these great teachers, they Hafiz Usman, they were masters already by the time they were teenagers.
MashaAllah. So here in South Africa, like, I mean, this is like new to most people here in South Africa. Although there are books and things that's been written on this, I've got the 2-volume set of Cosmic Script. What books or resources can you recommend for people who wants to get like a really good understanding of calligraphy? Have you written any books?
I'm writing my a monograph at the moment. It's about it's called The Making of a Master Calligrapher. It's a description of how one became a master calligrapher in the Ottoman period. Inshallah, it will be published this year. In terms of books to read on calligraphy, anything by Ur Derman is Ur Derman, Ugurderman. I would highly recommend to anyone if you can find those books. And to be honest, in Turkey, it's quite cheap to the published books are quite accessible to people, and maybe you can even find them on the internet. there's a website called islamicmanuscripts.info, and that has they've uploaded a lot of the PDFs of books on calligraphy. There's some really valuable ones in there, some of which are by Derman. I would very much recommend those to people that can access them.
I think one of my favorite websites is just to, like, you know, for the feast of your eyes, is the kataba.org. That website for me is just really outstanding. I mean, how they documented all these old masterpieces. Dr. Bilal, our time has really just flew by speaking to you. Know, time flies when you're having fun. I wish we could just like sit here all night and talk about this thing, because there's like so many, I'm sure there's so many questions and so many things running through our heads. But we would really love to keep contact with you. You know, our association, we do require lots of guidance and advice and things like that, because we really want to get this thing off the ground, inshallah, and to establish something. And just I just want to briefly just give you some background on what one of the aims and objectives is also for the Arabic Calligraphers South Africa, our association, is to not only revive the tradition of Arabic calligraphy and connecting masters with the students and so on, so that they can learn and get these you know, the master apprenticeship going, but also to go back in history and to how can I say, not reinvent really, but to come up with a script which is reflective of South African history and culture, especially our Islamic heritage, in terms of the old manuscripts that we find in South Africa, coming from the region of Southeast Asia, Nusantara, Indonesia, but it was written here, and those were the first recorded manuscripts, form of writing Arabic in South Africa. And what we want to do is we want to preserve that culture, or capture some of those moments and bring it now into this time that we are living in now, but also draw from other African scripts, like the Maghribi script. There's a few variants of the Maghribi, and just bringing together something unique for South Africa. What do you think about that goal? I mean, do you have any advice for us?
I think the best advice would be to speak to Muhammad Hobe about it, because he is, of course, he's South African. He grew up in that particular context. He's, of course, embedded in the Islamic calligraphic tradition. He would probably have much better. I mean, my only connection to my mother is born in Zambia. So she's a neighbor, I guess, to you guys, but that's my only connection to South Africa. So I don't know anything about the styles of writing that emerged there. Of course, you can have a look at Abu Bakr Effendi's, he wrote a treatise in, I think it's called Bayani Islam, or it's called Bayani something, and it's in Afrikaans actually, but it's written in the Arabic script. So that might be like a useful thing for you to look at the original manuscript. I know it's still there in South Africa. Yes, and I think it's the first time where Afrikaans was written in the Arabic script. So that's perhaps a good starting point for you. But I mean, in terms of like incorporating Maghribi with, I mean, South Africa and Morocco are very far. You know, I mean, of course, nowadays we think of like a general African experience, which is, of course, valuable, but it's, you know, the extent to which Maghribi came to South Africa and the way in which perhaps you might end up creating a collage of styles that may not necessarily work. I think perhaps a more localized approach may be valuable, but to be honest, again, I really hesitate to give you any kind of advice, because I have absolutely no idea.
MashaAllah, you are so humble. It's been absolute pleasure speaking to you. And Jazulfa also says, Jazakallah, Dr. Bilal. May Allah bless you, Dr. Bilal, for your time. Very beneficial. Jazakallah to ACSA. And likewise to you, Auntie Zulfa. I say Auntie Zulfa because I know these people, you know, they're like my local aunties here in South Africa, and they're my seniors. So,
Sure.
you know, maybe you think it's
Sure.
weird I'm calling everybody auntie. And then we have Widad that says, did girls learn Ottoman calligraphy too? Yeah, I think that is fairly obvious because there's lots of women who were calligraphers. But also, yeah, I think I've covered all the questions that we have from the chat. And we say once again,
But can I
Jazakumullah.
just, I know, sorry, I'm impinging on your time.
No, not on my
Fahim,
time. I
but
mean,
that is an important
I don't
question.
mind
Did
sitting.
girl-
It's like,
But just to answer that question, because it is an important one about gendered learning and where did females have access to learning, and of course, like social mobility in the Ottoman Empire is not as open as it was now, but nevertheless, there are some exceptional calligraphers female calligraphers that from the Ottoman period. Esma Ibret Hanım, for example, who's the wife of Mahmud Jalaluddin and his student also. She was an incredibly gifted calligrapher. And Hilal Kazan, who's based in at Istanbul University, wrote a book called Female Calligraphers from Past to Present. And it's a very thick book, and she goes through all of the female calligraphers from throughout Islamic history. And nowadays, of course, so many of the most talented master calligraphers in the world are women who are consistently winning competitions and producing exceptional work. And most of the students are women. When I was studying calligraphy, most of the students in the class are women, actually. And there's very few men. And
I think,
you know, that's like a really interesting and important development, I think.
There's also a testimony to what you are saying now, because most of the people, I'm going through the names, most of the people, even in this discussion, are they're all women. So, I mean, that just shows like the interest are coming predominantly from women's side nowadays. And what I've seen, I mean, I've also did like quite a few workshops, ran a few workshops on Arabic calligraphy here. And most of the time it's like, if you find one or two guys coming to the workshop, then you're really lucky, because sometimes I feel I'm alone. So I think, yeah, we should probably also try to get, you know, maybe after Ramadan, inshallah, to also speak to some of the women that are involved in calligraphy, the women calligraphers. I've noticed the use of letter wow in calligraphy more than in any other. Why is that so? That's another interesting question.
And I'll end with this question. Sorry, I know I'm taking too much time. One of the reasons is that it's a very difficult letter to write beautifully. It's extremely difficult to get it just right. And so one of the things is that it's a testimony to the skill of the calligrapher if he or she is able to write this letter perfectly. It also has a very strong symbolic reference, because, you know, there's a number of phrases in Arabic, for example, amanu billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi wal yawmil akhiri. The thing which connects all of those things is a wow, right? Billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi. So by writing a wow, it's kind of a trigger for these particular phrases. It's the thing which connects it. It's also, some people say, it connects the two parts of the Shahada, La ilaha illallah, and then Muhammadur Rasulullah, but the wow is the connection, right? It's, I believe in God and his messenger. And so the wow again is a symbol of that. You know, there's many different aspects of it. Right. It just could be a trigger for these particular verses. But overall, I think it's mainly to do with its aesthetic power. It's one of the very strong letters, I think, along with the alif.
MashaAllah, Jazakallah khair. So I would like to ask you for your final closing remarks, and maybe some advice to students or people who are interested in taking a path similar to yours, going over to Turkey or finding a hoja and spending some years over there, or maybe not, maybe spending some time here in South Africa under some local hojas. Inshallah, we will have some in the future. What are your
Inshallah.
advices to
Inshallah.
us, Ustad Dr. Bilal?
God, I'm not very good. I'm not very good at giving advice, I'm afraid. Maybe I can say what advice I would give to my, what would I say to myself at that age? You know what? You know, the only thing I was speaking to my wife about this the other day, and this may not apply to the younger people. I was saying to my wife that one of the things that really limits us when we're taking this journey is when we're thinking about how long it's going to take. You know, this idea of time is like a really crippling factor for us, because we think, okay, well, it took this person 7 years, it took this person 4 years, it took this person 6 years to learn. And then you realize, like, I'm 34 now, and if I was 40, and then now if I was 34 and I never studied calligraphy, I would say, well, it's too late for me, right? I'm 34. But then I would say, well, when I was 40, I would have said, well, if I had just done it now, I'd be at Ustad by now, you know? So I think that the only advice would be to not let this thing be, and it's like a terrible advice, probably. I'm sorry. I wish you had told me beforehand. I could have come up with a more mystical and exciting
we just want
beautiful
to hear
answer. But I think the main thing is to not let these things get in your way, and to just trust yourself. And if you do things with the right intention, inshallah, then God will open so many doors for you, I think. And so find as most people will tell you, I think Josh said exactly the same thing, which is to find a good teacher that you can trust, and someone that you're happy to spend and study with for the rest of your life. You know, it's not like in some of the other Islamic sciences, like you said, you can go to this teacher and then you can go to this teacher, and you can go to in calligraphy, you have one ustad, you know, you have one, some people say you have you have one qibla, you have one ustad in calligraphy. So make it the right choice, and once you've made that choice, just go in with everything and try and spend as much time as you can learning from him, and inshallah, may God make it easy for everyone.
I mean, inshallah, with that beautiful advice, I think it was the best advice, because it was raw, and there was no there was no stage to it. I think
no filter, no Instagram filter,
no filter.
No.
I mean, and that's how I like to keep these talks and discussions, because it must feel like we're sitting and having coffee together, and we just discussing things. And I think that's when you get the sweetness of what you have to offer. But Jazakallah khair, may Allah open up more doors for you and for your students. May they be successful under your hands, and also continue that legacy that you are continuing from your ustad and the other teachers before you. And you are a definite inspiration to many. You might not realize this because of the work that you have done and the studies that you've done. So you have definitely your book. We will be looking forward to your book, inshallah, and we'd definitely like to have a copy of the book for us here in South Africa. And also there are people saying, please invite Dr. Bilal to Cape Town, inshallah. So hopefully one day, when there's no more lockdown,
if you got the braai ready, I'm coming.
The braai, yeah, we definitely have the braai, and we'll have
that's it. Then I'm coming. If you got the braai ready for me, then I'm coming.
The braai, the Diet Coke. we'll get everything ready for you, inshallah. And we've got a lot of stuff here, Gatsby's, and in Cape Town we call it let me rather not go there. I'll get into trouble here with some of the elderly, my seniors. So Auntie Zulfa says junk food, lots of Gatsby's. I'm 78 and still aspiring. Well said, Dr. Bilal. So, mashallah, we have a 78-year-old
MashaAllah.
Shazir. Mashallah, uncle. That's we're very honored to have a 78-year-old person joining us this evening for the discussion. And may Allah bless you all. And Dr. Bilal, would you like to do the honors and make a closing dua for us, inshallah?
No, please, I'll be honored if you go ahead for him, please.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاك الله everyone. شكرا.
شكرا. السلام عليكم.
سلام.
Hello.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Walaikum salam.
Yeah, I can hear you quite fine. Just admitting some people to the room. Shukran, mashallah. Just give me one second, Dr. Bilal.
Sure.
Shukran so much for your time, taking out from your family time to do this. How's your family? How's your family doing?
Alhamdulillah, they're good. Alhamdulillah, yeah, they're good. Thank you. How's your family?
Alhamdulillah, that's good to hear. Well, they're going to sleep now.
Trying, yeah. How is your family, Fahim?
They're good. They're good, alhamdulillah. Like I said, they're gone to bed now already. So I was under the impression initially that I was going to be talking to you while you were in England, in UK, but now I see that you're in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get talking about all the details soon, inshallah. I got some questions for you. So have you watched the other interviews that?
I did, yeah. They were very good, yeah. Can you tell me a bit more about yourself whilst we're waiting? I know nothing about you or about calligraphy in South. I mean, I have a very close. Well, he's a friend and a teacher, Muhammad Hobe, who is a great calligrapher and really helped me in my calligraphic journey. And he's, of course, from South Africa, but I know nothing apart from Muhammad. I know nothing else about calligraphy in South Africa. So it would be nice to hear something from you.
Oh, mashallah, yeah. So Hafid Muhammad Hobe is also he's also a friend of ours. He came to. He's not from Cape Town, but I'm based in Cape Town. And he is originally from PE, but he studied in Johannesburg, right? And I'm sure you know about his story. So he actually came here in 2019, and we had an exhibition called The Seas of Ink, and we had calligraphers like Haji Nuruddin and his wife Haja Fatima. We had a Mauritanian Sheikh Muhammad al-Mishri, Egyptian calligrapher Sheikh Abdul Hamid al-Salam. We had Ustad Rafiq. Ustad Rafiq is actually a Turkish calligrapher, but he's living in South Africa. He's married to a South African. So lucky that we have him here in South Africa. So every year he runs like courses through the Yunus Emre Institute. Yeah, so, but you asked about myself. Okay, so to formally introduce myself, I'm Fahim. So I originally got exposed to Arabic calligraphy. You know, everybody gets exposed as a Muslim. You get exposed to Arabic art when you're very young, but you don't really know much about it. Nobody seems to know much about it in South Africa, especially with no calligraphers here. So Islam really came to South Africa through slavery, through the colonialism of the British, and but prior to the British was the Dutch, actually. Dutch East Indian Company. So when Islam came here, when Muslims came here, they were in chains, either as slaves or political exiles from different parts of Africa, but also Indonesia. So we had Islam actually, because we had Indonesian political exiles, and they were also big ulama in Indonesia. They were brought here because they were so powerful, rallying the people up against the colonial rule at the time. So they were removed from their homeland and brought to the tip of Africa, which was actually just a fort, like, was like a fort for the Dutch. They just passed Cape Town, like a refueling station in Cape Town, and then going up to the east and so on. So so Islam started spreading because of the da'wah that was made by these great ulama that were here, not out of their own free will, but like I said, because of the colonialism and so on. So we have a sheikh of Tuan Guru Imam Abdullah bin Qadi Abdul Salam, and he was a political exile, and he was imprisoned twice on Robben Island, the same place where Mandela was later held as well. So a very famous prison. And then he wrote 5 copies of Quran from memory from the prison. And his work and some of the other ulama at that time, that was in the 17th century, 17th, 18th century. So the work that they've done during those times, obviously leaving us with manuscripts, that was the calligraphy that was kind of practiced at the time, but more no artistic form of calligraphy. It was just basically for knowledge purposes. So we don't have the tradition like in Turkey, the Ottomans and things like that. So us here in South Africa, the Muslim community in South Africa grew out of, how can I say, necessity. We didn't really have, like I say, access to that kind of. We had actually an Ottoman sheikh who eventually came to South Africa to settle a dispute that was happening amongst
Abu Bakr Effendi.
Sheikh Abu Bakr Effendi, yes. So
yeah, one of his students founded the Ottoman Cricket Club in South Africa.
Oh yes, okay. So you actually know about South
in
Africa.
1960. Well, I know about cricket.
No, you know about cricket. Okay, yeah. So the Ottoman's Cricket Club. I actually wanted to join that cricket club when I was young. My father didn't want me. He was a soccer player, and he didn't want us to get into sports because he felt it was going to waste our time, and he wanted us to study the deen. So so I had to. So I had to run away with my friends, to try and sneak into the club. Into the cricket club or the soccer club. Whatever. It never worked because when my father would find out, then it just
what happens? The Shambok.
Sambok, yes. Oh, you know about the Sambok. Yeah. So later on in my life, after my high school, I traveled to Syria. I studied there for just I was supposed to stay there for longer, but I didn't stay that long. Between 2002 2003, I was at the Abu Nur University, and I got introduced to Arabic calligraphy by our sheikh. He was also a khattat. He got ijaza under Hassan Shalabi. And then I got introduced to calligraphy. Obviously, in our studies, we had to learn the Calligraphy script. So that was my introduction to real calligraphy, and he taught us on the board with chalk, and then later on also in books with his fountain pens, because he never brought bamboo pens or anything like that to class. But obviously he was a professional calligrapher, so he also runs the Madrasa Shamiya lil Khat al Arabi in Damascus. I still keep in touch with him, alhamdulillah. That was like I said, those years. And then I learned the Rik'a script and a little bit of Diwani. And then when I left Syria, when I came back home, I asked my father, are there no calligraphers here in South Africa that I can continue learning calligraphy? And then he said, oh, yes, I have a friend that knows calligraphy. And I said, oh, my father had a friend that knows calligraphy all these years and never introduced us to this. And then he called up his friend. It was Dr. Suleiman Nordin. And he came to my house actually in his spare time, because he was a doctor, like a surgeon. So in his free time, he would just like call me and say, okay, I have time to come now. I will come. Are you ready to learn? And he would come to the house and teach me some calligraphy. Alhamdulillah. And then I learned the Naskh. That was my introduction to Naskh. And obviously I found out later that, the Naskh was one of the most difficult scripts. So now, after the Seas of Ink event, I'm just fast forwarding. South Africa, we had, because of the work that my Ustad did, and also his peers and friends who were involved in calligraphy, he traveled every year to Egypt and for the book fair and things like that. Met calligraphers over there like Sheikh Mustafa Amri, and then became friends. And obviously they were also some of those calligraphers were also invited to Cape Town. They did some workshops here, but never on a big scale, never really like, that time there wasn't social media. So all those years they struggled to get something established here in South Africa. And unfortunately he passed on last year. Allah be pleased with him and grant him all the thawab of the work that he did. But there's still some people of his time that's still alive today. They are probably here in the group, like Auntie Mahmouda, Dr. Umar. They are obviously my seniors. So we started heading up the Arabic Calligraphers of South Africa as an association, an official body to promote the art of, or revive the art of Arabic calligraphy in South Africa, as there was nothing here actually for us. So like I say, in 2019 we had the Seas of Ink exhibition, where we had these professional calligraphers like Muhammad Hobi, Haji Nurdin and Ustad Rafiq, and so to expose people to the art of calligraphy. Because most people in South Africa doing calligraphy, they are doing painting work, which is obviously, as we know, it's not actually the traditional art of calligraphy. It's just one aspect of the calligraphy. So yeah, that's so. At the moment, I'm also a student under Dean Arts with Ustad Shahriyan Shahwaja, and I continued my Naskh with Haji Nurdin as well. So I'm still studying the Naskh under Haji Nurdin, and then other scripts like Rik'a and inshallah Diwani and so on. And hopefully I want to do Thuluth with Ustad Shahriyan Shah, inshallah. So that's in a nutshell about me. So yeah, I see there's a lot of people on the group now, so we can officially start.